Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Temte. On the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today, we have Anne-Marie Anderson joining us. Anne-Marie is a 3-time Emmy Award-winning broadcaster and a keynote speaker. You've likely seen her in the play-by-play booth at major sporting events on prominent networks, including ESPN, ABC, NBC, and Fox. Her first book, Cultivating Audacity, Dismantle Doubt, and Let Yourself Win, will be released next week. And Anne-Marie, just remind us of the date.
January 1st, actually, was
January
the release
1st.
date. Yeah, so it came out yesterday.
Fantastic. Well, today is January 2nd, so it's
We're rolling
excellent.
already.
The timing is excellent. Anne-Marie, I ask all of my guests this question. Please tell our listeners the short version of your story.
The short version of my professional story is that at 21 years old, right out of college, I was able to get a 6-month temporary production assistant job at ESPN. It was working 6 days a week with Mondays off, 6 at night to 3 in the morning for barely above food stamps level. And I thought it was just the most perfect thing ever. And after 6 months, ESPN decided to keep me on. And it has been 35 years since then, working for a variety of networks, including ESPN the entire time. And I have never had a day that I didn't want to get up and go to work.
So your personal purpose and the purpose of what the companies that you work for and what they do, that's perfectly aligned, is it not?
Yes, it is. I love sports ever since I was a little girl. I have 4 older brothers, and so I never got to control the TV. So, Andy, I have a really weird amount of sports knowledge from late 1970s, just because I would sit in the room with my dad and my 4 brothers, and I would be like, "Oh, the Orange Crush defense of the Broncos," and so
Wow.
sports was going to be my destiny. I knew I wanted to be a journalist, and news was not my genre. It's just a little too tough. I don't want to get into news, and I didn't want to get into entertainment, and so sports seemed the natural option. I loved sports as a child, and then sports reporting. My brothers tell me that I was a tattletale, like a world-class tattletale when I was a kid. So I thought, well, sports and reporting, perfect. There's my life.
Anne-Marie Anderson, world-class tattletale. That's fantastic. So Anne-Marie, if you had to pick one event in your life other than that first 6-month stint at ESPN, one event that was a key accelerant for your career, what would that be?
The first Olympic Games assignment I got in 1992. I had been at ESPN only a couple of years. I was 24 years old and assigned to help produce SportsCenter coverage for the Olympic Games from Barcelona. As you may recall, in 1992, there was a pretty big sports story in that it was the advent of the Dream Team, the first time professional basketball players were allowed to participate in the Olympic Games. And there was something there, Andy, and being in Spain and being around in the center of the story that just really stuck with me. And I thought, gosh, this is my job to be right in the heart of it. And I loved it so much. I went on to do 6 Olympics and produce coverage for the Super Bowl, heavyweight title fights, golf's majors, NBA, and baseball playoffs. I always liked being in the center of the story. You know what, Andy? Sometimes I say I felt like Forrest Gump. Like wherever the big story was, that's where I happened to be. And it's just so fortunate.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I still have on my bucket list to physically go to an Olympic Games. It's got to be such a wonderful experience. Now, let's start with your job as a keynote speaker. I want to dig into your keynote address, building an audacious mindset. In the business world, we don't hear the word audacious very much. I think it was Jim Collins author Jim Collins has this concept of a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal, but that's about as far as it goes. Can you give us the elevator pitch version of what it means to adopt an audacious mindset?
Absolutely. And I think part of the reason you don't use it in business is because it has this negative connotation. I know that when I was growing up, my parents would say, "You have the audacity to ask me that question." But when I really looked up the definition, it said a willingness to take bold, sometimes surprising risks. And I feel like in business, you need to do that if you want to stand out, if you want to progress. Now, I talk in the keynote and in the book about risks that are worth it and risks that are reckless. And it's very important to differentiate between those two. Risks that are worth it are going to move you forward towards your goal, your vision, your values. Reckless, of course, takes you further away from those. And there's three components to an audacious mindset. First of all, the first one is just the mindset itself, which is really based on optimism, right? If you're playing a sporting event, for example, and you're trailing by 12 points, why do you keep playing? Because you're thinking maybe you'll be able to come back and win.
Right.
That's the first one, optimism that it could work out. Second one is audacious behavior, and it just requires an action. You can't keep doing the same thing you were doing because you'll still be down by 12 or more points. You need to take some kind of action to change that. A new plan, whatever it is. In the business world, say, no, I'm not doing that, or let's try this. And then when those two things are married together consistently, the optimism and the action, that's when you get the audacious identity. And that's where it goes from, what's Andy doing, to, oh, that's Andy. He swings for the fences. And the identity is a really fun place to live if you're able to reevaluate consistently and recognize worth it from reckless.
That's fantastic. Now, in the corporate world, which you come from the world of sports. I come from the world of corporate America and global corporations. In corporations, timidity and risk aversion tend to be the status quo. We talk about stepwise functions to get from here to there. And a lot of folks in the backs of their minds, they've received the smackdown every now and then from a boss or a superior that thought that something was a dumbass idea. So they get the smackdown. And then from that point forward, they think, well, better to keep my head down than to stick it up and get it lopped off again. So let's suppose, I like to run thought experiments. So let's suppose you have a risk-averse, fear-based manager sitting right in front of you right now. They're very well-meaning, but they may be inadvertently holding themselves and their team back. How do you help them see the benefits of taking more risks, and how do you help them get started?
Well, you walk them through worth it risks, because I think a lot of people, especially there, what if we fail, right? In business, what if we try this and we fail? And what is failure really? I mean, it's just more data to move you forward along your path. Like if this doesn't work, if you're in marketing, this doesn't work, then you've got information to go in a different path. So first of all, it's kind of recalibrating our relationship with rejection and making friends with fear. Because when you say, okay, this doesn't work, I always tell people to catastrophize it all the way to the end. Like, is your company going to fold? If your company would fold because you took this risk, then that is not a worth it risk, right? That's a reckless risk. So it's about risk evaluation in terms of kind of deciding. So I would walk that person through the information of saying, well, what are you afraid of? Let's start there. What are you afraid could happen if we tried this? And what is that potential outcome? I call it catastrophizing your outcome. What are the chances, A, that will happen, completely catastrophizing, where you die destitute and alone? And then the other one is kind of what could happen from it? And usually the answer is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I love, this. A lot of people, they've got a relationship with fear. And it's a very ugly relationship. They don't want to have anything to do with fear. But learning how to kind of lean into those butterflies that you have. So you're a keynote speaker, and you can let one of two things happen. You can either take those butterflies and put them to use positively, or you can let them totally throw you off. So I just love how you frame that and help our listeners to think about their relationship with fear. If I can just ask you, how do you coach somebody about their relationship with fear?
Well, so there's 4 barriers really that stand between most people and cultivating audacity. And no matter if I'm talking to recent college graduates, heads of corporations, executives, school board members, whatever it is, it always comes down to fear, time, money, or your inner critic. So with fear specifically, I always give them this story that my first time on air, ever live on air, I was a producer, but when I first went on air, was in 70 million homes on ESPN. My very first time.
Wow.
And that was not the plan, Andy, let me tell you. I was supposed to be on a little regional sports network done by a branch of ESPN, not even out of Connecticut in the head office, but in Charlotte. But before I had my first college football sideline game, a friend of mine who was on big ESPN, who did the Super Bowl, who did the Notre Dame football games on NBC, called me and she said, "Hey, I've got 5 games that I've got to get back that I cannot do. Why don't you call them in 5 minutes? I'm going to call them now and tell them, you call them in 5 minutes and just let them know you're open if anything else becomes available." So I did what I was told and called and said, "I'm really looking forward to working with you. Let me know if anything else becomes available." And sure enough, the boss said, "Well, actually," and he gave me her 5 games. And I think because I had been around so much, they just didn't realize it was my first time on air because I'd already been at all the big events. And Andy, I was a mess outside the stadium beforehand, crying to my husband at the time. And he was like, "What is the worst that could happen?" And I was like, "Oh, what's the worst that could happen?" And I said, "I could be so bad on air, so bad that not only will I never get another on-air job again, but I'll lose my producing job too, because once the people that I produce for see I can't do their job, I'll lose it. And let me tell you something, if my entire career is gone, I am going to be a miserable woman to live with. And you, sir, will have no choice but to leave me because I won't be able to be a good parent to our children, who, by the way, are not even born yet. And I will die destitute and alone." And he said, wow, you really went there. Now, of course, I didn't believe that, but it was enough that saying it aloud made me think, okay, that's not going to happen. And I'm not going to win an Emmy Award either. So somewhere in the middle. And so I went on air and I was bad, but I did it again and again and again. Because once you see that the thing you're afraid of doesn't kill you, it gets a lot easier to take the next risk.
That's fantastic. So you're pretty good at the catastrophizing thing. I mean, you took that all the way to the end.
Yeah, and I have people do it, and they eventually stop and say, "Okay, I sound ridiculous." I'm like, "Yes, you do."
So now let's talk balancing act. Audacity has to be balanced with some degree of measure and restraint. How do you approach that critical balancing act when you're adopting an audacious mindset?
Well, it goes back to the risk management. Same thing, right? This is what insurance adjusters do. They decide where's the risk and where it's not.
Yep.
And understanding, make sure you're communicating, certainly with your team. You talked earlier about a leader who is risk averse. I think those self-aware leaders really need to think about becoming a shape-shifting leader so they can adjust to each person that they oversee and find out where their fears are. Are they afraid they don't have enough time? If that's the case, you can use the urgency fallacy. Are they afraid of failure? Are they afraid if they speak up, somebody's going to say it's a dumb idea? That is that leader's option, but really important measure to be able to say, listen, by coming up with ideas, we can build upon them. So it isn't going to come down to, that's a stupid idea. I won't allow that. Now, if your supervisor is not somebody who challenges risks and takes it in, then I recommend having a conversation with them. communicating, I'd like to try to think outside of the box. How open are you to hearing my ideas to this? Doesn't mean we have to take them, but I feel like maybe if I throw out some ideas of things we haven't done before, we might be able to find a balance. And I think that's what the balancing act is about. Here's some ideas that I have. They may be too far out for you, boss, but they may lead to another idea and another idea. And it's about having, I'll use the buzzword, safe space to be able to suggest. But it all comes down to communication. If you don't communicate this is what you're doing, then, people, especially risk-averse people, may be like, wow, you're so far off the mark.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. We're going to take a really short commercial break, and we'll be right back with Anne-Marie Anderson. Hey, it's Andy here. I've got a new podcast I'd like to introduce you to, The Saturday Morning Muse. Start your weekend with me by exploring topics that span leadership, business management, education, and other musings that are designed to support your journey of personal and professional continuous improvement. Subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform. And we're back with Anne-Marie Anderson talking about her new book, Cultivating Audacity and the World of Sports Broadcasting. Continuing our conversation from before the break, you come from the wild, woolly world of sports broadcasting that, frankly, not a lot of people understand. Lamarck from marketing at a major corporation might be saying, yeah, that audacious mindset stuff works in sports broadcasting, but I'm sitting here at insert corporate behemoth X here, and being bold isn't part of our culture. How do you help Lamarck get the most from your approach?
Lamarck is going to have to look at what the possible outcomes are and then present those first before he tries those opportunities. So if Lamarck is a leader, then he needs to talk with his team and say, we're going to try something a little bit different. Here's what could happen. Here's also what could happen on the other side. It's probably going to be in the middle. Either way, we're going to get some information from it. Now, if Lamarck is working for somebody else, then he needs to go in and have that conversation saying, what do you think if I gave you some ideas that are a little bit different and you can evaluate, right? It's your supervisor's choice. So you can evaluate whether you try them or not. Just a way to try change things up a bit. Because again, my question would be, does Lamarck like his job? Because if you're sitting in there and you're too afraid to bring up the idea to have change, to have growth, because here's the thing, people have FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. I don't have FOMO. I have FOSS, the fear of staying the same.
Yeah.
And businesses should also have the fear of staying the same. So being able to communicate when we grow, right? Because staying the same is not safe. People think it's safe, but it actually ensures no growth is possible. If you stay the same, you keep doing the same thing. And with technology changing so rapidly, it's a backslide for sure.
Yep.
So you can't stay the same and have growth. When you have some risk taking, you can have growth, even if the setback looks minor. It comes back down to, though, Andy, who are you communicating with? What's your environment like? And I want to know, do you enjoy your job? Do you feel free to be able to say, here's some ideas that I have, and not be ridiculed, not be fired? Because you want to be in an environment where you're excited. You want to create a life that you're excited to wake up to. I always hate it when I hear people say, oh, I got to go to my job. And I think, well, then that's not a way to live.
Yeah, that purpose alignment is essential. So let's suppose that Lamarck takes your advice and goes to the supervisor once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. How many times does Lamarck go in with ideas and not get any kind of response or feedback before Lamarck says, yeah, I'm going to take my skills elsewhere?
Well, certainly when you're saying 5, I mean, if you're not getting any feedback, then yes, and find a like-minded organization. Easier said than done. I understand that. That is something you can explore during an interview process, by the way. just by asking about how do you like feedback. So many people don't ask that. How do you like to receive the feedback? Do you want me to call you? Do you want me to make an appointment? Just to see how open the flow is. But if Lamarck is going back to the same supervisor time and time again, and that supervisor says, yeah, no. If the words, "this is the way it's always been done," come out, that's probably not the business you want.
Run.
That's probably not the career you want. If it's always been done that way, unless you yourself are risk averse, in which case, then maybe cultivating audacity isn't for you. You're not going to grow. But, if you can't get past the idea of some growth, and with that, potentially some growing pains, or your supervisor can't, then it's time to look elsewhere.
Yeah. Now, to make sure that we haven't left anything on the table here, what's the most important theme from your book, Cultivating Audacity, that we have not explored yet in our conversation?
I would say it's time as a barrier. I think that reprioritizing our time, urgent versus important, right? Urgent, we can do urgent all day long, Andy.
Yeah.
Every one of us. The things that are urgent, respond to this text, this email, pay this bill, do this report. No, here's the thing. Urgent tasks are always going to get done because they're urgent by nature. Nobody blows off an urgent task. A lot of times they provide a high sense of satisfaction because you can check them off your list. They can be done quickly. Almost anything urgent can wait 15 minutes. 15 minutes while you prioritize what's important. Because things that are important often require more time. They don't have necessarily a hard deadline, but there are consequences if they're not met, like you live unhappy in your job. And things that are important move you closer to your values, your vision, and what you want to do and be, including in your office life, what you want to see the product become, those things. But we can all stay on urgent all day long and never have time for what's important. So I suggest carving out some little blocks of time for important. If you know for these next 15 minutes that you are going to be able to be creative and do some blue sky thinking, or write down some ideas about how you can do things differently, or draft a memo about it, and know that 15 minutes from now, when your phone alarm goes off, you will go back and take care of those urgent tasks. That flip creates a lot of room for growth and change and excitement.
Yeah, thank you for that reinforcement. Earlier this year, we had a gentleman named Aitiken Tank from Jotform on the show, and he was all about the urgent versus the important. So second time this year that we're getting this advice. Anne-Marie, my tagline, and it's right over my right shoulder, is grace, dignity, compassion. Now, you've traveled the world. You've covered all the sporting events that we talked about earlier. I'm interested, who's a rock star in the world of sports that exemplified these traits and simultaneously maintained a strong competitive drive? Because, that in an audacious mindset, a lot of people might think that audacity means I've got to be a jerk, or I've got to be, just driving all the time. Who in that you've run across was best able to balance ego and competitive spirit?
The very first name that came to mind was Junior Seau, the former linebacker from the San Diego Chargers. Junior was obviously in demand for interviews all the time. The same thing with Randy Johnson in baseball, John Elway, quarterback. When you go in as an ESPN crew to ask questions of somebody that everybody wants to ask questions to, your time is limited. Yep. And so Junior said to me, I'll let you ask 3 questions. That's all I can give you per week, 3 questions. And I said, I think I was 26. I had a lot of guts. And I said, okay, I'll ask 3 questions. But if you give me any kind of a cliche in the answer, I get a 4th. So if you say no, I am team, backs against the wall, that's why we play the game, any of those things, I get to ask a 4th. So we used to have a lot of fun with that. When I was in the locker room, and again, I was 26 maybe, and it's a locker room. Men are changing in there. It's very uncomfortable. There's very few women, if there's anybody in there beside me. There was one player who was very disrespectful to me. He was not dressed. He was very disrespectful. I was just trying to ignore it the best I could. And Junior came charging at him. And of course, he carries a lot of weight in that locker room.
Sure.
And so for him to be able to say, that's not how we treat people, and stand up that way really meant a lot to me. The way he respected me as a young woman, but as a journalist and a professional, meant a lot. And then, of course, on the field, he was an incredible player. The loss of Junior Seau is a big loss for humanity, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right, Anne-Marie, let's have a little fun as we end the show. I've got 2 lightning round questions for you. I give you access to a little time machine. You can send a short message to an earlier version of Anne-Marie Anderson. What's the message, and what previous version of yourself do you choose to send it to?
I'm going to send it to my high school self when I was playing volleyball and knew that the only way I was going to get to move out — I love my parents, by the way, but they were very strict — to move out was if I got a scholarship to college. And I wasn't sure. Am I going to be good enough? And what am I going to do after that? And the advice would be, you're exactly where you need to be right now. And I feel that, and I tell it to my kids all the time as well. Right now, you are where you should be. The rest of your life will unfold as long as you be where your feet are. Yeah. And eventually, I ended up where I am now, but I'm not anywhere near done. And I tell myself the same thing. I am exactly where I should be right now.
That's fantastic advice. We are all works in progress. What are you focused on right now in your personal journey of growth?
There's an assessment at the end of my book that has people assess their professional and career, how happy they are with it, their relationships, and their health and wellness. And everybody can take it and go separately at it. And when I did it, I found that I immersed myself so much in the professional and in the health and wellness that the relationships outside of my family, who I have great relationships with, including my ex-husband and my children, everything's great there. But I needed to nurture more of the relationships with my girlfriends who have been by me for so many years. And so I consciously schedule that time into my calendar because you know what, Andy? It's important. And it's not urgent, but it's important. And so writing the book has helped me with that process and taking that evaluation and saying, yeah, this is great, but I need to schedule what's important for me as a person. And that's the focus, is scheduling time to connect with people.
Thank you for that reminder, because relationships, good relationships, are purposeful and they are nurtured. And they take energy from both parties. So thank you for that. Anne-Marie, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Please let our listeners know where they can get in touch with you.
Sure. They can get in touch with me a number of different ways. So first, my website is www.AnneMarieAnderson, ANNEMARIE, Anderson with an O in it, .com. If they're interested in the book, they can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, anywhere there. There's also a page, cultivatingaudacity.com, that will help them. And of course, I'm on Instagram, I'm on X. I haven't quite embraced TikTok yet, but maybe I'll do it, or LinkedIn.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. And I'm sure our listeners thank you too for your contributions today.
Thank you for having me on The Balancing Act. I enjoyed our time.
Excellent. Well, my name is Andy Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major streaming services as well as out on YouTube. This show is produced by Nicholas Temte. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share this public good with your friends and your colleagues. We'll see you next time on The Balancing Act.